Please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're discussing the state of the economy with the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, Rajiv Kumar. Let me start by asking you about the macros and what the assessment at Niti is when it comes to the macros. While we are seeing a cyclical recovery in the economy, there are several risks that we need to factor in. Oil prices, one possibility. The possibility of a fiscal slippage is something that the market is always concerned about. High interest rates and, of course, the rupee now touching a record low of 69. From everything that I've highlighted as possible risks, what would you be most concerned about?
Shireen, you pointed out to four things, and let me take them one by one. The first one, of course, you mentioned was the oil prices, and as you would have noticed, these have tended to come down, and we are very pleased with Donald Trump's announcement that he's asking Saudi Arabia to ramp up the production because of the fall in Iranian crude and the Venezuelan crude, and you have seen that there has been some increase, and the prices have moderated. And also, we've got news now that U.S. shale should be entering the picture in a much bigger way.
Okay.
And we are urging the government to try, fix up the imports from U.S. So our prices, as you noticed in the last 3 weeks, domestic prices have come down. So I think oil prices, the scare is sort of gone. On the fiscal slippage, we had a meeting of 29 leading economists in Niti just the other day. I think it was on Thursday. And there were two very clear views that had come out. See, one, of course, that in these days of turbulence and vulnerability, one must hold on to the target as hard as one could.
Yeah.
But there was the other view also that, in the past, fiscal slippages have not always produced inflation, and they might be needed for generating employment, which is a real concern for every government.
Okay.
But the good news here is on the revenue side. As you would have seen now, the GST numbers are very good, 17% increase, the tax base has gone up, and the direct tax numbers, actually direct tax is 17% up, and the GST is coming in at close to 1 lakh per month. So I think there is a fiscal room now being available for the central government to ramp up its public capital expenditure, which has taken care so far of the lack of commercial bank credit to infrastructure. And on the rupee, let me just end by saying that, the rupee is still relatively overvalued given the relative effective exchange rate. So in that sense, it shouldn't be a cause of concern. In any case, there hasn't been a free fall like we experienced that in 2013. And it's very clear, I think everybody agrees, that we are far better prepared and we have far more gunpowder to handle any vulnerability that might come about as either through the Trump tantrums or the Fed raising the rate, etc. So overall macro, we in Niti are pretty sanguine. We think that we are on the right track.
Okay. And
that the economy, given the latest manufacturing PMI, the sharp increase that you've seen of 53 going up to 53, I think the recovery is strengthening, and you will continue to see a rate of growth of above 7.5 in the quarters in FY19, as it were.
Sir, you picked up on several aspects there. Let me just go back to that meeting that you spoke of, the economist meeting that Niti held, where you said that there was a view on whether you need to stick with the fiscal deficit number or could you perhaps exceed it to try and pump prime the economy. Which one was the majority view, of sticking with the deficit number or being able to pump prime if need be?
There was a clear distinction in my view between economists representing investment banks and funds and those who are concerned about fixed income, state of fixed income markets, etc. And basically the financial sector economists. But on the other hand, we had I think equal numbers of the other macroeconomists from think tanks and institutes of IIMs and others who sort of believe that growth has also got to be a prime objective, and in fact employment, as they said, and they said that there is therefore appetite, there is therefore no need to be very hawkish on the fiscal on the fiscal deficit
Is
number.
that the Niti Aayog's point of view as well, sir? Is that the Niti Aayog's point of view, that we don't need to be particularly hawkish on the fiscal deficit number?
Niti Aayog's point of view has always been to exercise fiscal prudence and to be cognizant of the target, but to continuously explore space for higher fiscal space to meet the obligations of public capital expenditure.
Okay, let me ask you about some pending decisions, sir, and this is something that we believe we could get an answer from the government on in this week, and that is the MSP. Why is it taking so long for the government to come out with the calculation as far as the new MSP is concerned, and where do things currently stand? Are we expecting a decision this week?
Well, there are two separate parts here, points here. One is the announcement of the MSP itself. And I think you should see that announcement within this week or the next week. I think those numbers and those estimates being done by the CACP, the Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices, I think are ready and they would be announced. I suppose, as always, they are going through a final check on how the, in the government as a whole. So that's first point, and I think there should not be much delay in that announcement. The second aspect, of course, is the government's own schemes for procuring at that MSP, because now the government has announced its intention very clearly in the budget that they will cover all 17 crops, all 23 crops under the MSP formula, and therefore the Niti Aayog had proposed 3 alternatives to that, and those have yet to be discussed in some detail. And I know that these discussions are
but it's been a while since the budget, Mr. Kumar. So that's what I'm trying to understand. That why is it taking so long? I'm also given to understand that perhaps the Finance Ministry has raised some concerns on the fiscal impact of the new MSP formula that the Niti had suggested, the 3 proposals that you had put forward. So has there been a revision that the Niti or the Agriculture Ministry has made post the Finance Ministry's feedback?
Yeah, if you had read it carefully, Shireen, the objections from the Finance Ministry, which I haven't seen formally, but I've read in the press, are about the 2 formulas that have been proposed, because the third actually wasn't discussed in some sense, and this is what so the Finance Ministry's own concerns, genuine concerns, plus the fact of some of the states wanting to have their views heard about the 3 different schemes is what is causing some complexity. It is a very complex situation, because and what we are trying to do from Niti is to re-look at all the 3 and figure out as to how we can minimize the fiscal burden while getting the best deal to the farmers. But the most important thing here is that the government is committed to giving the farmers the best deal possible, so that any complaint about procurement being less than what is needed or warranted shouldn't be there.
So how much longer, Mr. Kumar, before we actually see a decision and clarity on the new MSP regime? And ballpark, we are given to understand that the proposal that was sent to the Finance Ministry would have in fact meant an outgo of about 25 to 30,000 crore rupees. That was the ballpark that we were given to understand. Is that accurate?
I am not sure of that. I am not sure of that number. And to predicting how long anything will take in a government is like predicting the World Cup, soccer World Cup results. So I'm not going to hazard that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I think it will be out soon.
Given the current appetite and context, are we at least when it comes to big ticket strategic divestments, are we likely to see a transfer from one government balance sheet to another?
No, you will not, and you will see actual disinvestments taking place, and you may, however, be a little disappointed in the sense that us not being able to find a single strategic investor in each of the public sector enterprises, because that's not easy to get, and that depends on a whole number of things. But you will see this target of 80,000 crore being met through proper, as I say, normal disinvestment proceeds through the market. Let me put it like that.
Okay.
And this will happen in the third and the fourth quarters of FY19.
Okay, so you're saying strategic divestment may be a challenge given the lack of buyers, but through the ETF route, through the OFS route, the government will achieve its disinvestment target. There has been a fair amount of criticism that why is the government pressing ahead with LIC picking up IDBI Bank? We are given to understand that there were perhaps at least two interested private sector players, but the government has chosen to go the LIC route. Why should the government saddle LIC with IDBI Bank that's saddled with a mountain of NPAs at this point in time is the question that most people are asking.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether you're right in saying that the government has posed the LIC. LIC, I suppose, has an independent board, and it's probably a board decision of the LIC. But even if I accept the fact that the government may have in some sense nudged the LIC to do so, I don't see any issues in that. Because if there is surplus cash available in one of the government corporations which can be put to good use, if and if only the IDBI management is changed, and if only we have made sure that the governance, the corporate governance has been put on the right track, then we should be doing this. Because I think this is a question of one company making a sort of a reasoned investment decision in the hope that it will make money going forward. Now I believe that the chairman and managing director of the IDBI has now been appointed.
Yeah.
He's somebody who's who's a wonderful. I know he's one of the best professionals in the I think it's Sriram.
Yes.
Mr. Sriram,
yes.
Whom I've known in the SBI when I was on the board. And I think under his leadership, you will find IDBI, IDBI recovering and being put on the right track. And therefore, for all you know, just like Barack Obama did with his banks, LIC may have made a very good bet.
On that note, we'll take a break, but we continue our conversation with the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, Rajiv Kumar. Welcome back. You're watching the CNBC TV18 special. We're in conversation with the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, Rajiv Kumar, on the state of the economy. We are given to understand that there are reservations even within the government quarters on whether an ARC is the route to go or whether an AMC is the best way forward. The SBI chief in his conversation with me very clearly said the need of the hour is an asset management company. What's your own view on this? Has the Niti done any work in any form or fashion at all on this, and what would you suggest?
Niti has not been called upon to look into this, and we've not been consulted. So I would rather hold my brief on this. But I must emphasize what I did in the case of IDBI, which is that I see the problem in the public sector banks as one of corporate governance and one of the whole culture and the ability for risk assessment and risk assessment and credit management, and the entire change that is needed for these banks to become far more sort of creditor, loan friendly and improve their credit to deposit ratios, etc. So I think whatever solution is found there, I have no comments to make because we were not consulted. But in the public sector bank management, I am very clear that we need to bring this change, this radical change in the way public sector banks are managed and in the way the public sector banks make their credit decisions and assess their risks.
Okay. Mr. Kumar, let me move away and talk to you about another controversial issue or confusing issue, sir, and that is the issue with respect to electric vehicles. There seems to be policy confusion. One day we hear that there needs to be a policy, the next day we hear that there doesn't need to be a policy at all, that individual ministries and individual departments can take trees and individual departments can take these things forward the way that they want. Now, state governments are confused. Telangana, for instance, saying now we'll wait for the centre to decide what its EV policy is going to be. I mean, what is going on as far as the electric vehicle roadmap is concerned?
A lot is going on, Shireen, as far as mobility is concerned, as far as modern mobility, shared, connected, zero emission mobility is concerned, is going on. And I think the very good news really is that the Prime Minister himself is going to lead, has directed Niti Aayog to conduct a global summit on the 7th and 8th of September on mobility, and we are preparing for that, and in preparation of that, we are actually preparing some very substantial papers on all aspects of mobility, not just zero emission vehicles, but also on charging infrastructure, on the logistics, on digitization and the use of data, etc. But we recently held a meeting where I think 35 states were represented because the Prime Minister has wanted us to get their states involved in drawing up the plans going forward. So all of them were here, and they are all now have constituted their task forces. They are preparing their own plans of action, which hopefully will be ready by the 7th or 8th of September. And we are coming up with an umbrella paper which will put together all these aspects, and hopefully it will be announced just before or at the summit itself, where we are expecting, by the way, some leading global players to be present. Niti Aayog has been charged and is now undertaking a framework paper, which at the very latest will be available in the public domain in its final form at the time when the global summit takes place.
Okay, so you're saying that we need to wait till September for this umbrella framework to be presented for public discussion. But may I ask you, sir?
No, hello.
Yes.
Shireen, public discussion will take place earlier.
Okay.
So these papers are being prepared as we speak,
the finalized
and they
framework
will be in
will
the public
presented.
domain.
Sure.
That is one. And second, that in the meantime, the ministries are going ahead with their own actions, as it were, on points which have already been discussed and in which there is consensus within the government.
Okay. Will subsidies be provided for personal mobility, for the use of zero-emission vehicles for personal use, or will this be restricted for vehicles that will be used for public transportation for commercial use? Because again, there's been a lot of back and forth on this front. So as you put this umbrella framework together, where do you stand on this issue?
I can't preempt that because that's exactly one of the major issues that are being looked at this point of time. But let me give you some statistics, which is that 87% of all vehicles on the road in India are either two-wheelers or three-wheelers, and only 13% are four-wheelers, which includes personal vehicles, personal cars, and buses, as it were. Right now, so therefore, we need to focus much more on the public transport as well as two-wheelers and three-wheelers for us to make a real impact on the electric mobility and to use this moment in time for India to leapfrog into a different form of transport model than we have followed so far.
Quick question on what we're seeing happen as far as the global tariff war is concerned. I wouldn't call it a trade war just yet, but the possibility of a full-blown trade war is now also gathering momentum, given what we have seen from President Trump today. In fact, the EU saying that they will respond or retaliate with commensurate measures. India has already notified the WTO that it intends to impose retaliatory tariffs, so it hasn't done so just yet. Do you believe that that this is now going to start to impede on global growth, which has really been the strongest that we've seen in several years?
Of course, and it's already all this noise that is happening has already caused a lot of turbulence in the global economy, and has actually sort of broken down the synchronized recovery that we were experiencing in 2017 and bit in the 2018. Already we see that the recovery is becoming desynchronized, with the US taking going much further, faster at 4%, and Eurozone and Japan sort of lagging behind. But I'm somehow convinced that better sense and more sanity will prevail in Washington.
What about India's position? We have notified the WTO about retaliatory measures on account of the tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum by the US. But beyond that, the US is now asking us to not do business with Iran, for instance. How would you, what would your assessment be in terms of India's response?
I mean, a two-part answer to that, Shireen, which is one that India, of course, accepts all that the multilateral bodies like the United Nations General Assembly or the World Trade Organization, asks us to do, or where we are in, where we have signed on on some agreements, and we will do that. And I don't see so far that the UN has imposed sanctions on Iran. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, of course, we will have to balance our, overall global commercial policy and look at which bilateral relations are, more important and which ones, and therefore which we have to take care of or nurture. So I think therefore what you need is a more deft and more subtle commercial policy, which I'm sure our Ministry of Department of Commerce is embarking upon.
Let me end then by asking you, sir, you spoke of how mobility will be one of the priority areas that the Niti is working on. I would imagine Ayushman Bharat is the other, along with, of course, the MSP rollout. But end of 4 years now, what is going to be the key priority for you?
Well, these are the three that you mentioned. And by the way, I must mention here that mobility is a priority because it is the most immense opportunity for generating jobs and pushing up growth. Because that's one bus that we cannot afford to miss because of its potential for generating good quality jobs, better environment and higher growth. Other than those two you mentioned, for me one of the biggest priorities is nourishment. The Prime Minister has made me the chairman of the National Nourishment Council, and I think we just need to do whatever we can do to get over this blemish of having 38% of our children undernourished and 50% of our mothers anemic. So so therefore that is separate from Ayushman Bharat only because it needs to focus very sharply on children below the age of 5. And this is what Niti is very much engaged in at the moment. So that's the other priority. And the last one is, of course, our aspirational districts. The 115 that we have selected and in which we are focused very laser-like on that. But that's not the last one, because I must mention to you water. And we just came out with the composite index on water. And I think the situation in water is pretty dire, and I hope you will join us in raising the awareness about the water situation in the country, because without that awareness we won't be able to do what we need to do to get over our water problems and the water stress.
Oh, absolutely, sir. We did do a full show the day that you released the water index, but a lot more, of course, needs to be done to take that agenda forward, as you rightly pointed out. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Mr. Kumar. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18, and thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thanks, Shireen. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this CNBC TV18 special. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.